It is hard to know what President Assad's strategy for his country is, but it seems to be to destroy what he cannot rule. Today, eastern Aleppo was under unprecedented assault. A few child survivors were pulled clear, but everything and everyone appears to be a target.
More than 300,000 civilians inside Aleppo are in danger of extermination. All the world should know this.
Also on News at 10 tonight. The news tightens on so-called Islamic State. The Defense Secretary tells us the battle for the key city of Mosul will begin within weeks.
We now have the very real prospect of Daesh losing their last stronghold in Iraq and being pushed out of Iraq altogether.
He also describes how coalition forces have destroyed bank vaults hiding $1 billion in hard cash. Will it be peace or war in the Labour Party? The moment of truth is upon them.
Don't shoot him. He has no weapon.
New video emerges in America's most troubled city with new questions for the police. And what is it about Somerset as Middlesex win a thrilling championship finale? The county of Viv Richards and Ian Botham misses out again.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. One short week after a fragile ceasefire allowed children to come out and play in the streets, the 300,000 terrified residents of eastern Aleppo find themselves trapped tonight in the eye of a perfect storm. Their city already looks like some kind of modern-day Stalingrad, and it now seems they are facing a bloody endgame that may not entirely beg a comparison with that terrible siege. At least 90 people died today in the worst bombing raids there in recent memory, the precursor, it seems, to a decisive ground offensive by President Assad's troops. Syria says it's been targeting terrorist positions in Aleppo, not civilian areas, but local people don't mince their words. They say they are facing what one witness called extermination.
In Aleppo's bombed-out ruins, rescuers surround a trapped baby boy. Pull him out, they cry. Be careful, he's little, says another. Frantically digging with their hands through the rubble, they manage to make the hole bigger. And then pull the baby boy out. He's alive and rushed away for treatment. But elsewhere, there were no miracles. The body of this boy is taken away, killed overnight, along with his father and brother. The scale of the bombardment unleashed in a fresh wave of airstrikes is clear. Activists say Syrian and Russian planes pounded eastern Aleppo. This six-story building lies in ruins. Neighbours say 15 people were killed here, 12 of them children. One resident told News at 10 what he saw.
No one is alive except for just one. He went down to see what's happening, and the whole people, the whole individuals that they were inside, they were all dead.
Another of Aleppo's residents, who's been updating ITV News for 2 months, made this urgent appeal.
More than 300,000 civilians inside Aleppo are in danger of extermination. All the world should know this, because one day they should be regret. They should be so sorry for letting us down.
Even the headquarters of the volunteer rescue force was struck, their vehicles destroyed. Aid groups say Aleppo is being annihilated. A week which had started with a ceasefire in the city ends with more casualties. A depressing return to business as usual as Syria's slaughter continues. Neil Connery, News at 10.
One of the reasons it's so hard to watch all this day after day, of course, is that there is very little we can, or appear to want, to do about it. But if we switch our attention for a moment to another deeply troubled part of the region, the areas of Iraq occupied by the so-called Islamic State, then the picture is at least a little more encouraging. I spoke to Britain's Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, today, and he told me that very shortly a major offensive will begin to drive IS, or Daesh as he calls it, out of its stronghold in the northern city of Mosul. The government pledged itself some time ago to destroying Islamic State, or at least assisting the Iraqis and others in doing so. And now it seems as if the key battle for the city of Mosul is about to begin.
Yes, this is the final battle, the last big city in Iraq that Daesh hold. And thanks to the contribution of the RAF, the training provided by British troops as part of an international coalition, we now have the very real prospect of Daesh losing their last stronghold in Iraq and being pushed out of Iraq altogether.
When coalition airstrikes began in 2014, IS controlled most of the Tigris-Euphrates basin spanning Iraq and Syria, an area roughly the size of the UK. But since then, they have suffered significant losses and now control only 10% of Iraqi territory. IS has, however, made gains around Mosul itself, keeping control of Iraq's second biggest city. The plan is for the Iraqi army and the Kurdish forces to encircle the city over the next few weeks, cut it off and then move in. If successful, this would leave IS only with small pockets of territory up near the border with Turkey and around Raqqa in the east of Syria. Retaking Mosul won't be easy, of course. It's a city of 1 million people, and there are said to be 3,000 IS fighters holed up amongst them, who've had many months to prepare. That said, it is not just the loss of territory that has been hurting the organisation's leaders, like al-Baghdadi, here in a mosque just after his forces took the city. Over the past couple of years, British airstrikes have deliberately targeted IS's oil infrastructure, hitting around 1,200 oil assets. The group has lost 50% of its oil revenue in the last year alone. And then there have been the strikes on the cash vaults that are said to have destroyed $1 billion.
This was a strike on the bank vaults in which cash was being held. That has made it much more difficult. The notes having been destroyed made it much more difficult for Daesh ISIS to pay its fighters and to be able to control the areas that it runs.
I have heard it said across Whitehall that Daesh accepts that it's encircled and the end is coming, and has been pushing much harder to get terrorists and would-be terrorists out into Europe, and that the threat actually is going up as a result of you closing in on their territory in Iraq. Is that true or false?
The threat to Europe is there anyway. The threat to Britain is there anyway. We know they have been planning attacks on the European mainland and in Britain for several years now. We've been forestalling those attacks.
It is highly unlikely we'll see the back of terrorism anytime soon, but IS, like Al-Qaeda before it, might be about to run out of room for manoeuvre, in Iraq at least. Britain's air forces have already been preparing for their part in this Mosul offensive. It is 2 years since Parliament voted to allow airstrikes by the RAF against the forces of the so-called Islamic State. Since the launch of Operation Shader in Syria and Iraq, don't know who comes up with the names of these operations, but never mind, RAF Tornadoes have flown more than 2,300 sorties in Iraq and Syria. Reaper drones have taken to the sky 1,500 times, and Typhoons are said to have carried out nearly 900 missions. Last month, the RAF carried out its 1,000th airstrike in the region. Well, our correspondent, Geraint Vincent, has been to RAF Akrotiri, from where the crews will launch their raids as part of this new offensive.
The runways at RAF Akrotiri are seeing a lot of traffic. These are the fighter-bomber aircraft which make up much of Britain's contribution to the campaign against the so-called Islamic State. They head for the skies above Iraq and Syria almost every day. What they do when they get there is always recorded by their onboard cameras. The aircraft strike with 500-pound paveway bombs or laser-guided brimstone missiles. On the ground, their crews are happy to talk about their missions, but for reasons of personal security, they don't want to be identified.
That it was a vehicle-borne IED, so a vehicle that was full of explosives that was being transported across a river. So we then dropped a paveway 4 onto it to destroy all the explosives.
Copy, yeah, I'm happy for the turn any time. We're switches safe, going nose, cold visual.
You are clear joint, coming left about.
We flew alongside the Tornadoes as they refueled on their way to carry out that strike, which was one of around 200 missions flown by the RAF this summer, preparing the ground for an attempt by Iraqi government forces to liberate the city of Mosul, which fell to IS fighters, or Daesh as the coalition refers to them, in 2014.
These pilots have been flying these missions for 2 years. They say they can see the progress they're making in the fight against the extremists, but none is sure how much longer the operation is going to last or when the job is going to be done.
We've been doing an awful lot of work to shield and protect the Iraqi security forces as they move forward towards Mosul. And we've been doing an awful lot of work to protect the Iraqi security forces closer to Baghdad and other areas, so that they feel confident enough that those areas are secure and they can release the forces they need to move on Mosul. So we've been doing a lot, and it's at their pace.
Well, we're talking about an army, aren't we, that ran away 2 years ago in the face of Daesh. Are we talking about a different army now?
They are confident, they're capable, and they know that we're with them every step.
The commanders here say that the coalition effort against IS in Iraq is the most precise and powerful Air Force campaign ever fought. But it's on the ground that the war will be won, and victory there is dependent on the will of Iraq's government and its soldiers. Geraint Vincent, News at 10, Cyprus.
Ever since police shot dead a black man in North Carolina on Tuesday, protesters have been demanding officers release their official video of what happened. The police have still to make that video public. But today, after 3 days of demonstrations, another film of the shooting has emerged. This disturbing footage was taken by the victim's wife on her mobile phone. And whilst it may not settle the issue of whether he had a gun, it does, as she pleads with officers not to shoot, raise some extremely awkward questions for the police.
Don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. He has no weapon. He has no weapon.
A desperate intervention from a woman dealing with a desperate situation.
Don't shoot him. Don't shoot him. He didn't do anything.
Rakia Scott records the standoff between her husband and armed officers.
He doesn't have a gun. He has a TBI. He's not going to do anything to you guys. He just took his medicine.
Ignored by the police, Mrs. Scott appeals directly to her husband.
Keith, don't let them break the windows. Come on out the car. Keith, don't you do it.
Moments later, Keith Scott is dead.
Keith, don't you do it.
The police say 43-year-old Mr. Scott was carrying a gun. His family deny it. A photograph showing a black object lying near Mr. Scott's body has already been published. It could be the same object which appears to be discarded by a police officer in the new video. Further footage from Mr. Scott's dashboard camera and the body camera of a police officer has not yet been released. Today, Hillary Clinton issued a tweet demanding that video should be published without delay. The governor of North Carolina disagrees.
I respect the Mecklenburg DA's responsibility of ensuring that there's a fair investigation, and I also want to respect the police officers who is going through, I'm sure, a very difficult process at this time too, and balancing that with the public's want to know.
Keith Scott's shooting led to 2 days of rioting on the streets of Charlotte, his home city. Today, the cleanup was in evidence as Mr. Scott's grieving mother appealed for calm.
I would appreciate, as Keith Lamont Scott mother, that y'all give up the rioting. Rioting is not helping the situation.
But until conclusive evidence of what happened on Tuesday is made public, the situation is expected to remain tense. Nick Wallace, News at 10.
Barring a shock of seismic proportions, this time tomorrow, Jeremy Corbyn will be basking in the knowledge that he's been re-elected as Labour's leader. Few, you may say, it's all over. Well, We will see. It may, of course, just be the moment when the cracks really begin to show, especially given the fact his campaign group Momentum is holding a rival conference nearby. Ironic, then, you might say, that all this is taking place in Liverpool, the city which became synonymous with Labour's battle with the hard left, which, of course, nearly destroyed the party in the 1980s.
Once again tonight, the liver birds find themselves perched on the edge of history. From their spot, they've seen this all before. Political rebellion is in the water here, as Liverpool prepares to host not one Labour conference, but two. This is Jeremy Corbyn's campaign group Momentum. They're organising their own festival just down the road from the main event, fully expecting his re-election tomorrow.
Is this a way of showing Labour MPs just how strong Momentum is?
No, this is, I think, a way of kind of engaging the much wider section of grassroots campaigns and kind of bringing them in and making those connections again, which I think the Labour Party has lost, over the past decade or so.
And new docks opened on the Mersey in quick succession.
When the party meets here in Liverpool docks for its official conference, we know the divide will run wide and deep. But then the Mersey is no stranger to troubled waters.
Not even Thatcher that can ignore that weight of pressure.
In the 1980s, the hard left group Militant took control of Liverpool Council, refusing to make spending cuts and mounting up debt, until the Labour leader Neil Kinnock forced them out of the party.
And you end in the grotesque chaos of a Labour council hiring taxis to scuttle around the city, handing out redundancy notices to its own workers.
The man shouting lies is Derek Hatton.
They love drinky poos at Westminster.
He says from tomorrow MPs will have to accept Momentum's hold on Labour is far greater than Militant's was, or step aside as Labour candidates.
If the Labour Party now decides that it's going to go on a particular platform with a particular manifesto, and the MP isn't prepared to accept that, then I think that constituency has got every right to actually question them.
So you think they should be deselected?
I think that the constituency's got every right to question them and make a decision accordingly.
He's talking about MPs like Louise Ellman, who wants Momentum suspended in her Liverpool constituency, claiming to have evidence of a takeover.
If we have Momentum as a party within the party seizing control, that's the end of our electoral prospects.
Momentum deny the claims, and many MPs have had enough of this fight.
I was literally met with a deluge of abusive tweets.
But now she's ready to forgive.
It'll be very tough, and I think there will be people who have got to swallow their pride, people who perhaps need to apologise. But let's remember exactly who we're there to serve. Let's stop the navel gazing and let's start providing that strong opposition.
So perhaps this time they'll be calm on the Mersey, with some acceptance in Labour that, for now, agreement may be the best course ahead. Paul Brand, News at 10, Liverpool.
Well, our political correspondent Carl Dinnan is outside the conference centre in Liverpool tonight. Carl, this has been a pretty bruising few months, let's be blunt. Jeremy Corbyn's got lots of vociferous supporters. We heard some in Paul's report there. He's also got a lot of very unhappy enemies. What tone do you think he's going to strike if he does win tomorrow?
Well, look, he's going to try and reach out to those people who've become more disillusioned with his leadership over the course of this campaign. He's already started that with an end-of-campaign message today, thanking even Owen Smith's supporters for the way the campaign was conducted. So he says he wants to reach out, but look, he will be doing it on his terms. You may remember on Tuesday night there was a meeting of Labour's ruling executive, and after that it was expected that he would meet with some of the leaders of the parliamentary party before coming to Liverpool. But as he arrived in Liverpool tonight, he had not yet met with the parliamentary party. The executive will meet again tomorrow. Now, I did just bump into, this being conference, just bumped into one of his closest aides who promised me there would be meetings. Jeremy Corbyn will meet with MPs, but he said there won't necessarily be conclusions anytime soon. So Jeremy Corbyn wants to reach out, but very much on his terms.
There's been, as you know, and we've talked about it before, a huge amount of discussion about the possibility of his MPs, or some of them, and perhaps even a majority, splitting off and forming a separate party. Is that completely gone as an idea? Is it on hold? How do you think they'll respond?
I'm not hearing anybody talk seriously about that at the moment. I mean, there are some MPs who don't like Jeremy Corbyn who are determined to do their own thing, but I think within the structure of Labour, they may form a kind of grouping like the old Socialist campaign group of MPs that was on the left of the party. There may be a moderate or right-wing version of that, but within the parliamentary party. Other moderates will go back into the shadow cabinet, although again, one of those who's believed to be heading back in said that collective responsibility wouldn't be like it was in the old days. They would still want a bit of leeway, and one day before the next election I still think there's every chance there'll be another leadership challenge, Tom.
Carl, should be an interesting day tomorrow. We'll see. Thank you very much. Now, the quite shocking figure emerged today that around 8 million internet users in the UK may have had their data breached by the cyber attack on Yahoo that we reported on last night on News at 10. Investigations are still underway to discover the source of the hacking attack, which compromised an estimated 500 million Yahoo accounts worldwide. The UK Information Commissioner's Office says serious questions must be asked of Yahoo. To say the very least, you might think. Now, I'm sure it's impossible for most of us to imagine what it must be like to live for 8 years with the agony of knowing your daughter died a violent death whilst on her dream holiday. How much worse then for Scarlett Keeling's mother today, when even the closure of justice was denied her. 2 men were cleared of raping and then leaving the 15-year-old girl to die on a beach in Goa.
Scarlett Keeling's mother, Fiona, had to be helped away from the New Delhi Children's Court, having heard 2 of the men she blames for Scarlett's death cleared on all charges.
I'll speak later. Yeah, I'm still shocked, really.
15-year-old Scarlett had been drugged, raped and left to drown on a tourist beach. While the 2 men accused of feeding her alcohol and drugs before assaulting her walked from the court,
But were you relieved when you heard the verdict? I'm just relieved. I'm just coming down feeling,
Scarlett's mother gave her response to the female judge's decision over the internet.
I'm just reeling at the moment, to be quite honest. I still can't get my head around how she could let them off on everything when there were so many witnesses saw them putting drugs out for her.
Scarlett had been staying with friends at Goa's popular Anjuna beach. She'd been to a Valentine's party here. The 15-year-old from Bideford in Devon was last seen alive with one of the accused. It was February 2008 when Scarlett's body was found on Anjuna Beach. The following month, locals Samson de Souza and Placido Cavallo were arrested. In June that year, the case was taken over by the Central Bureau of Investigation, who charged the pair with culpable homicide, not murder. The 2 went on trial in March 2010, but years of delays, including frequent changes in judges, has meant the verdict has taken 6 years to reach. The local police have been accused of incompetence and worse. At first they said the 15-year-old had drowned, until a medical test carried out at her mother's insistence revealed more than 50 injuries. After today's verdict, she was again questioning the Indian legal system.
I've heard the chief ministers and the ministers promise they're going to support us and they're going to treat it like it was their own daughter, and then they shut the door on their faces the next day. So I just don't know who I can believe and who I can trust as far as the system here.
Fiona McEwen says she's not sure she has the strength to take her fight for justice any further. Paul Davis, News at 10.
Terrible story, really. Now, for Theresa May, bringing back grammar schools was the first big idea of her premiership, but it's an idea that so far seems to have brought her rather more brickbats than bouquets. The latest criticism came from a big report out today. The new research revealed that comprehensive school children from lower income families did worse in areas where there are the most grammar schools. 50% achieved 5 GCSEs grades A to C compared to 60% in places with no grammars. That also applies to the poorest children. 27% got 5 GCSEs in areas with the most grammars compared to 35% of pupils where there are no selective schools. Furthermore, the study warns that new grammars would have a negative impact on nearby schools and hinder academic achievement overall. So the question for Mrs. May tonight, I guess, is, are grammar schools really such a good idea after all?
The Speaker of the House of Commons has to be apolitical. Trafford is the only borough in Greater Manchester to have a grammar school system, and locally it's hailed as a huge success. Schools like Altrincham are consistently ranked top of the National League tables, and its head is proud of its academic standards.
In this school, the most able, whether they come from the poorest background or from the most wealthy background, really do thrive, because we can offer an academic curriculum which is geared up for those sorts of students, and we have excellent teachers who are then able to deliver that excellent curriculum right up to the very highest level.
Yet only 3% of his pupils are from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. Compare that to this academy for boys, less than 10 miles away in inner city Manchester.
Remember, they get worse and worse.
90% of students here are from ethnic minority backgrounds, and almost half of pupils qualify for free school meals. Progress is above the national average, but the head believes the nearby grammar schools cream off the most able students to the detriment of his pupils.
For those who don't get into the grammar school, they will feel branded as failures. And if you tell somebody enough that they're a failure, they're not going to disappoint you. They will be.
He's backed by a major new report, which suggests creating more grammars will see poorer students do worse and hold back high achievers. And any quota system to redress the balance wouldn't work.
What increasing the intake of grammar schools for those pupils are likely to do, they're likely to reduce, firstly, the beneficial impact of grammar schools as they become more comprehensive, and they're also more likely to lead to damaging impacts for poorer children who don't attend the grammar schools.
The Department for Education says relaxing restrictions on selective education can and should be to the betterment, not at the expense of other local schools. And they're still consulting on the proposals. Sejal Karia, News at 10, Greater Manchester.
And finally, it hasn't been a day of very cheery news, has it? But here's something more positive, at least if you are a Middlesex fan. Back in the day, cricket's county championship was one of the country's premier sporting contests. But it seemed it was too slow, too genteel for our fast-paced modern tastes, and crowds and interest had dwindled too. Well, let's just say paltry at best, until this year's championship, that is. Now, we're not saying that Lords was crammed to the rafters for today's season finale, but with 3 teams in the hunt till the final dramatic moments of the last match, it was certainly a gripping climax.
120 plus years, there hasn't been a finale quite like it. Middlesex, the new county champions, at the end of a season that began in the chill of spring and concluded this evening among the autumnal shadows.
I've never known it to be this tight going into the last day of the season. It's a great advert for county cricket, and by the crowds, county cricket's not dead.
County cricket is much derided these days, lacking the thrill and razzmatazz of its T20 cousin. Today, it fought back, and how?
Bowled in! They're targeting the stumps.
Yeah, very happy about it, yeah, great day. 10 wickets, what more can you ask for?
Very happy, excellent day, excellent result.
Any one of 3 teams could have taken the title today. If Yorkshire had beaten Middlesex at Lords, it was theirs. But if that match ended in a draw, Somerset would be crowned. Their fans were helpless TV onlookers in Taunton today, and as the afternoon wore on, the reality they'd be bridesmaids again was beginning to sink in.
I woke up this morning thinking this is Somerset's moment. They're going to do it, because we've been runner-up 3 times, and always the bridesmaid, never a bride.
The excitement was all too much for some at the home of cricket, but that tension was pierced by Toby Rowland-Jones. 3 wickets in 3 balls.
Would you believe it?
A hat-trick, quite the way to finish a remarkable day and a remarkable season. Many draft obituaries for the county for a day or 2 at least. Steve Scott, News at 10.
There we are, that's it for now. Lots coming up at the weekend, including more on a story that's emerged whilst we have been on the air. It's being reported by the Mail and the Sun, amongst others, that Pippa Middleton's iCloud account has been hacked and images taken from it have been offered for sale to reporters. Up to 3,000 of them, it is said, including pictures of the Duchess of Cambridge and her children. And the Junior Doctors Union, the BMA, is meeting tomorrow to talk about whether to hold a 5-day strike at the start of next month, a dispute that has long drawn out as it is controversial. I will be doing the agenda on Monday, back here on Tuesday. Whatever you're doing this weekend, have a brilliant time. And in the meantime, Thanks very much for watching.